know their rights, and I think maybe the Mental Health Commission needs to be upfront with people that anybody who presents in a voluntary capacity, or their loved one, whether they have intellectual disability or not, may end up as an involuntary patient and be subject to detention, forced drugging, and electroshock. And even some of the medications coming on board, Abilify, they're going to put a microchip in them. So I think we need to be very cautious, and there's huge, I think, onus on the Mental Health Commission, and I think they need way more resources without ever taking on the legislation.
I'll ask you to come back. And I think you're right that the CRPD people seem to have an anticipation that when the CRPD is ratified, that suddenly everything will change in the provision of services and supports, and that's not the case at all. Okay, panel, and then I'm going to try and wind up. Hang on. Panel, if you'd like to.
I've been asked to respond to the respite.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The answer directly to your direct question is no, we don't have facilities for respite for your loved one.
Yeah. But can you volunteer, as the system would have you volunteer? Are you in a position to take her in for a few nights?
Are we?
Yeah, you personally, not you the service, you personally.
Oh, me personally, no, definitely not. No. Definitely not. However, I have seen, I went to visit Tom down in the West last week, and there was a great presentation by a group down West who were doing some very innovative work around short-term respite and even longer-term respite in the community with host families who have been resourced to put in all of the stuff that you're talking about in terms of the rails, the guards, the training, and they've gone through the whole plethora and are very well resourced to do that. And it seems to be, again, it was an hour-long presentation, but it seems to be, from somebody on the outside looking in, seems to be working very, very well. But that's not replicated from what I can see.
In the urban centres?
No, definitely not. No. But we aren't. The reality is we don't have any respite beds. We have kind of alternative respite solutions for some of the people that we support, but we don't have any respite beds.
You have blocked beds. Blocked beds is a huge problem.
Do we have block beds? I couldn't necessarily say we have block beds, but we have created no new residential places in a considerable amount of time.
For no respite, blocked beds.
Okay.
It's a huge problem.
I just want to come back to the panel now in terms of general questions or asked. Thanks, Joe.
I suppose just in relation to the last point regarding ECT and electroconvulsive therapy, I think it's important to mention, and I mentioned it this morning in the working group of the Health, the Mental Health Amendment Act 2015 that was enacted by the President on Christmas Day, removed unwilling in legislation, whereby it now means that nobody who has capacity to make a decision can be given ECT against their will, irrespective of whether they're a voluntary patient or an involuntary patient. It cannot happen anymore. That is the legal position.
It's absolutely no consolation to anybody that has experienced forced electroshock and has defense that fear. It means nothing, because you're not allowed to make an advance directive, number one. You're not allowed to make an advance directive, which would be legally binding, and unable still remains in the Mental Health Act. And who will be deciding who has capacity? None of this really resonates with people that have experienced forced psychiatric treatment. It means nothing to them. And we have seen psychiatry and how creative they are in relation to the Mental Health Act. Even when somebody goes in a voluntary capacity, agreeing to take all medication, we've seen attempts to sanction. So, I mean, this incredible creativity is applied to legislation. So with the best will in the world, the way it's framed and what the intent is behind it, that may not well be what happens. And Brendan Kelly, a professor, has had huge sway. The review of the Mental Health Act, in this legislation as well, and probably in advanced directives not being legally binding. And, unless those he's the person that had the minister's ear along with others, not the Capacity Coalition, not people with lived experience and professional experience that wanted human rights respected.
Okay, I suppose in relation to that, that legislation, the amendment legislation to take away unwilling, came in December. The Commission's been calling for that since its establishment in 2003, and we've been told that it would happen, and it took that length of time for it to happen. So that isn't good enough. It was too slow. So that is the first thing. The second thing to say in relation to it, that the recommendations of the review group, the report of the review group of the Mental Health Act 2001, and it's on the Department of Health website, has clearly articulated the issues that you have raised about protections for vulnerable persons, for voluntary persons, and has clearly said it is not acceptable that advanced healthcare directives for persons with mental ill health are not treated and respected in the same manner as for everybody else. And I mentioned at the workshop this morning that is something the Commission is not happy about in the current assisted decision-making capacity legislation. We've articulated that in every opportunity that we get, and it was very clear in the recommendations of the expert group that if it wasn't addressed, because at that stage the assisted decision-making was at bill stage, and it was very clear from the group that if it wasn't addressed in the bill, that it would have to be addressed in revised mental health legislation, and that is certainly still our position. The mental health legislation is not perfect by any manner of means, it's far from perfect, but it certainly is a long way off its predecessor, which was 60 years in existence. The recommendations of the expert group in relation to ECT also has suggested that there should be external oversight in relation to ECT, and that the mental health review boards would be authorised to review that as well. So hear exactly what you're saying, and the Commission's view is that the autonomy of the individual has to be a predominant facet that's taken into consideration, and that protections need to be put in place. So we will continue to keep advocating for that, and as you've correctly pointed out, we're not there yet in relation to every aspect of it.
Okay, I can't. I want to go, Pat. I want to let Pat come back to the question. No. Sorry. The day is sorry. The day's gone on long, and there's a number of questions that have to be responded to.
So just on the whole area of waiting this respite and the pressure in terms of your own daughter and so on. So I suppose there's a couple of pieces of that. One is that there is a challenge to us, and I suppose a number of people have raised it in different ways. So we don't have sufficient capacity at the moment for residential. We're short of respite places, and we're short of sufficient PA and home support hours as well. So we're in a stage of prioritising the resource we have. One of the things that has happened, and you mentioned the issue of losing permanent residential places to or permanent respite places to residential. So in the context of the point I made about not having received resources for either of those four headings since 08, between 08 and 15, that's over 7 years, it has meant that the pressure has come on. Plus, the regulatory regime for national residential standards was introduced from 13 on. So what has happened is that in terms of having we have a kind of a bit of a perfect storm with a loss of not having growth, sufficient additional resource to provide for additionality, not having additional dedicated resource for changing needs. So you have an ageing population with higher requirements. And also then what happened as we started implementation national standards, as HICWA implemented those standards, we actually lost some of the existing capacity. So the pressure then, and the point was made about blocked beds, I don't like the term blocked beds, but what it is a loss of, someone with changing needs then has a requirement, and you lose 3 or 4 respite beds that were supporting maybe 20 families and so on. So that is an absolute issue for us. So
are you open to people to come talk to you about solutions to try and increase capacity?
Oh, absolutely, and like I suppose part of our responses to that there has been a lot of innovation. Walk, which we've talked about some of what has happened there, and on other occasions, people have come up with bespoke solutions of some home support hours or whatever to try to resolve particular situations. So what we've been doing then as well, if you look at the planning side of it, if you look at the figures, the data would show you that from 13 to 18, it was predicted that we need 2,000 additional residential places. That's 400 a year on average. It's just, the requirement is very predictable, and when you take changing needs into account. So what we're trying to do with Minister and so on has been to try to make that case, and I think he's open to try to work with us to do that. And I think what will be important, and out of difficult times can come positive solutions, and don't waste a crisis type of thing. What will be beneficial, I think, is that as additional resource comes, that we should start to drive out a new way of implementing things, rather than just necessarily putting the resource into traditional ways of doing things. So on the respite side, we got €1 million this year for respite. So we've targeted that. It's only €1 million. We've targeted that to the host families. So there's the host networks are there, and we're trying to support that and drive that out.
But that's just it, Pat. I'm saying, one, the host networks are not there, and two, they are grossly inappropriate for people with extreme, extensive support needs.
Exactly.
So they're being excluded by virtue of the fact that the government is forcing a policy of home share.
But to be honest, it's not forcing the policy. We just made the decision, I ultimately made the decision, we had €1 million, what would we do with it? There are home share networks there, and there was a benefit of using that to spread that resource for those who can utilise that service. It's not to say I'm not saying that's the perfect solution. It isn't. It's one of a menu of options that would be there that we would require. We need more resource. We made a case during the year to try to get 6 million during last year. That would target those who are most in need at the moment, waiting for respite and so on. If we got 6 million, you'd make an indent into that. And that would take account of some of those with more complex needs. I think the important thing is we're learning both in disability and in elderly services that there is good capacity now within the private sector in particular to provide to you good solutions of hoists and all that type of stuff, but it needs to be resourced so that we could respond more innovatively and appropriately to the cases that you're talking about, like your own situation. There's another bigger issue that Paddy has referenced previously around all of this then, and I know it came out in your workshops this morning. So I'm talking here just about the prioritisation of resource, but fundamentally then even if you have that, there's an issue about the state and how much demand we're going to place on volunteers and carers. So that's an important piece, and there's a carer strategy and so on, needs to be developed more and so on, but that's an issue for us collectively as a society and for ourselves in the HSE and department then, is there too much demand being made, particularly on those with higher end needs, one's own life is effectively, taken over with the caring of siblings and there are a whole range of issues there about burnout and so on. So I think, that's another issue that's there as well. The highest priority for us that we're trying to push is actually the resourcing to deal with the waiting list that you talked about. In terms of Michael's House and David, absolutely we've made the case, David, for additional resource. And we're working very closely with Michael's House in relation to some of the challenges they're facing. Colleague here was talking about absolutely the waiting lists. A particular piece you were saying, which I value, is the issue of going out to visit and meet service users and actually meet people on the ground and so on. So I have a rule, I try to do that at least once a month as part of what I'm doing, and I encourage my team as a management team to go and visit and to meet people so that you actually know what you're talking about. Yeah, I hear the thing about Lola. Yes. Lola is like the only. Yeah, I hear what you were saying about Portrag and so on in relation to Lola. On the interpretation of new directions, I suppose the piece, a really important piece to say about new directions is that was I think a proactive piece of work that we took on within the HSE to roll out and articulate what a standard would be. There's no statutory basis to this standard at the moment, and it's important that we've just gone through a formal statutory implementation of statutory standards for residential, and we can clearly see we're learning from the implementation of that. So in terms of implementing this, we do need to do it in a proactive and positive way, collaborating with providers on the one hand and with service users and families and communities on the other. And that's what we're trying to do. So this is by no, there's no one suggesting that new directions is implemented in any way. There's going to be a significant resource requirement to fully implement this. But I think what we felt within the HSE, it was really important to put out there in terms of vision, this is what we see as the type of model for the future. And this is how we think it can be done. And there are many who are on the road and on the journey. I think in fairness to those at the Tullamore thing, and there have been many others, they're not suggesting that it's, I don't believe any of the providers are saying, look, this is the perfect solution that we have it cracked. Absolutely not. Because there's a long journey here. But what we're doing is pushing out the bar and saying this is where we see the model going, and let's all collectively work on that. Equally, let us look for the resource to support its implementation, because now we have a model that can work. We need to build a coalition of support around it and then drive out and look for the resources around that to implement it. The transport issue is a big one. We're not adequately resourced for transport. The system isn't. We're working at the moment I suppose the way the system developed was, school buses and all the rest of that. They were there originally, and resource-based education. The HSE started to support some of that, and it has been an incremental type of progress. But we have the resource we have, and what we end up doing is trying to spread that, and you do get a situation like in relation to new directions and so on, that often we're able to resource the service, but we're not able to resource the transport, and that becomes, of course, a huge issue. We're working with the Department of Transport, the Transport Authority, have now developed coordinators at a local level, and we're beginning a process of engaging with those to see how do we move that forward and get the kind of standardised transport available and delivered by the Department of Transport, obviously with part of it being supplemented by ourselves, but that we collaborate on that, and it is a big issue and certainly far from being solved. Rose mentioned the piece about bespoke services. There is an issue about how do you balance bespoke services with 5 or 7 day group homes or residential centres, and I think fundamentally it's about involving the service users themselves. That's a key piece, driving it out of the needs assessments and so on, and try to work with people. If you don't have the perfect solution, well, what's the response? Being responsive in relation to try to provide the best possible solution in the circumstances. Yeah, covered most of the time.
I'm going to. No, sorry, folks. It's we were just
I
on
think you're
course.
respite place. I just want to talk. It's very funny, actually. It's very funny. I got respite in Ireland, and I got respite after a hospital in the UK because of a rare disease at the hospital. We were going to spend a week. We went to the Kildare Trust. We were told about it by a nurse. Is this hospital? It was an amazing place for disabled people. It's part of the National Trust. And I never thought, with my disability, that I could go down a zip wire. I never thought that with people non-verbal, cerebral palsy, young adults, would be having wheelchair races with a whiskey in their hand. Well, I got